This is Join Us in France, episode 262. Bonjour, I'm Annie Sargent, and Join Us in France is a podcast where you'll hear pragmatic advice for your next trip to France. On the podcast, we talk a lot about Paris, but we love to talk about the rest of France as well. And today, Elise and I take you to the lovely city of Collioure and the Vermeille coast near the border of Spain. I love interviewing regular visitors to France, but Elise brings her unique professional input, and I always learn so much from her. Today, she'll tell us about the historical development of Collioure, how this area became part of France, about Spanish refugees and the retarida who came through Collioure, German bunkers on the coastline, the arrival of artists, including Matisse and Derain in the 1870s, the Fauvist movement, of course, Collioure today, best ways to enjoy it and bay, local gastronomy and wine, Port Vendre, and why you should stop there. It's very close to Collioure. Driving to the Point Béart lighthouse, the Anse de Paulille and the Dynamite Factory, Banyuls sur-mer. She has a hard time saying that word, but it's really easy. Banyuls. And Elise shares a great restaurant and hotel recommendations too. If you enjoy listening to Join Us in France, please consider supporting the show on Patreon, where you'll get exclusive content, or make a donation by clicking on the Tip Your Guide green button on any page on joinusinfrance.com. Details of how you can spread the Christmas cheer after my conversation with Elise. I am not certain there will be an episode next Sunday on December 22nd. I am trying to set up a recording about Christmas markets in Amiens, Ghent in Belgium, and Reims, but it's not quite buckled down yet, so I'm not sure I'll be able to get the interview. So if you don't hear from me on December 22nd next week, I'll be back on December 29th. And have a wonderful Christmas with family and friends. Show notes and transcript for this episode are on joinusinfrance.com/262. Hello, Elise.
Hello, Annie.
How are you?
I'm fine.
It sounds to me like you're getting awfully close to releasing your voice map for Toulouse.
Hallelujah. Do I say that again? Hallelujah. Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Hopefully, if all goes well, my voice map for Toulouse will be ready for Christmas time.
Right. Oh, that's wonderful. So if this is your first time listening to the show, Voice Map is an app. It's a travel app, and it lets you take self-guided audio tours of lots of places in the world. I have created 3 of them for Paris.
Yep.
And Elise is doing one now for Toulouse, and she has plans for more.
Yes.
And I have plans for more too, because I think Voice Map is a great way to discover a city, because you can do it on your own time.
Right.
You can go out when it's not raining. You don't have to set up an appointment for, right now we're having a bunch of strikes. Well, if you can't get to where you're supposed to meet your guide, I mean, for as much as I like in-person guiding, sometimes it's just not the right time to do it. You know, like you can't get to it, or it's raining, or it's too hot, or whatever. With these self-guided audio tours, the app tells you, meet me in this place. And you go. And it's magic. When you get there, Elise starts talking to you.
Me, my voice, really.
Yes. It's
like
amazing.
Annie.
It's amazing. So, that's the Voice Map app. I will, and of course the app itself is free. You can install it on your iPhone or Android, and then you purchase specific tours.
Tours.
Right. And to purchase the tours, you'll email Elise and let her know that you want her tour, and then she'll send you a code.
And it will be wonderful.
Or you can also buy it directly through the app. That's the other way to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, so bravo.
Thank you.
Bravo.
Yes, it's been a fair amount of work, but
it is a lot of work.
Of course, I would like to say also that occasionally, if you have a group of people, it's nice to have a tour with me. If you have 3-4 people and you want to do a little tour, because the difference is, and that's also, I mean, I think both are good, and I understand perfectly because I've used the equivalent of a voice map in lots of places when I want to see things, and I'm on my own, and I like the idea of listening to it and stopping it when I feel like and putting it on again and everything, right? And if you have a little group, if you have a little family group or a group of little friends and you want something customized, that's when a private tour is a nice idea.
Yes. And they both have their place. And
they both have their places.
They're both very good. And it's true that if it's a group of people, then everybody putting on their headphones might not be ideal.
Yeah.
It's not as good.
It's not as good. But, and then you can't chit chat about it. But definitely this is it's meant to be something so that you can think about it as you're walking around. And hopefully this is what people will do.
Yeah. Okay, so the topic of today's conversation is not...
No, it's not. It's not the voice map, and it's not Toulouse.
No, it's Collioure.
Collioure and the Vermeille coast.
Vermeille coast.
Yeah, the Vermeille coast. Vermeille is...
It's a color.
Color, red.
It's red, okay.
Red.
I wasn't sure.
Yeah, it's the color red because the rock, a lot of the rock and the soil in that area is, in fact, very, very reddish. Mm-hmm. It's a particular tone. I mean, from painting, since I paint, it's a very specific kind of red, but It's a very nice name. And where we're talking about, and obviously one of the reasons is that it is a place that is fairly well known by tourists. People have heard of it. A lot of people have actually gone to Collioure, but I don't think people know really what its true history is. But it's part of the southeastern coast of France before you get to Spain.
Yeah, it's pretty close.
It's very
Spain.
close.
I think it's 27 kilometers from the Spanish frontier.
Exactly.
Border, not frontier.
It's the last stretch of coastline on the Mediterranean. The mountains there are called the Albère.
Okay.
And they jut out into the sea. And if you are a little further north, if you are following the sea, the coastline, one of the beaches after Narbonne, for instance, you can see the Albère. It's kind of like a peninsula that juts out into the sea. Mm-hmm. And that's really, it's like a huge cove. And Collioure is at the beginning of that. And we'll follow it around, and we'll talk about Collioure and then a little bit about Banlieus, which is another town that's literally on the other side before you get to Spain, of this big cove. But it's really the last stretch.
So it's kind of part of the Pyrenees. I mean,
it's definitely part of the Pyrenees.
Right,
it's Pyrenees in the area called the Pyrénées Orientales, which means the Oriental or Eastern Pyrenees.
Right.
And part of the whole history of Collioure, which is interesting because it has nothing to do with the reason that most people go there these days. But part of its history has to do with the history of Catalonia.
Right. It's the heart of Catalonia.
It's the heart of Catalonia. And in doing some research, because having just been there a couple of weeks ago, gave me the idea to talk about it. But I thought, well, even me, I know its more recent history, which is connected to a group of artists, but I didn't really know about its ancient history. Mm-hmm. And so it's actually kind of interesting. Well, I mean, it's interesting from my point of view when you see what has happened to it. For instance, what I didn't know is that the Romans actually had a settlement there. So it's a place that goes back very, very, very far.
Right.
It goes really back as far as we can go in terms of settlements. Probably even the Greeks at some point after they settled Marseille were traveling around. They were looking for places to do what the French like to call a comptoir, which means a trading post, basically. And because there's this huge, enormous cove there, the Romans settled and did their first fortifications there. But then for centuries, it was really part of Catalonia, which was not part of France. Catalonia was part of what, of course, is a separate kingdom. And it wasn't even the kingdom of Spain until much later on. It was the kingdom of Catalonia.
It was its own thing.
It was its own thing.
Yeah.
And in fact, the kings of Catalonia were on Mallorca.
Oh, yes.
So it was Mallorcan.
Right. When you visit, they do have an impressive palace on Mallorca. Yeah.
Yes, they have an expensive palace. In fact, Mallorca is a place I'm really hoping to go to one day. I've never been.
Oh, I've been.
It's supposed to be very beautiful.
It's a great cruise stop.
It's a great cruise. Yeah. But it turns out that the counts or kings of Mallorca controlled most of this area, and I would suppose that was because they were interested in having a coastline that was defendable. And so they were the first ones to actually build fortifications there. Massive fortifications.
Now you're talking about the fortifications around Collioure.
About Collioure. Okay. Yes. From
right.
Collioure. And there was a chateau built there in the 700s.
Oh, wow.
So it goes back really far. And probably also the chateau, which was a fortified castle, was to defend against the Saracens, who were making incursions into as far north as France at that time.
Poitiers.
And they went much further, in fact. So then it's very strange because Spain, which was a separate little princedoms. I never know what to call them because some of them were counts and some of them were dukes and some of them were kings, and I don't know how you mix all of that together. And they were little separate entities.
Yeah.
Entities. There were counts of Roussillon.
Okay.
And they fought with the kings of Mallorca. And
okay, so Roussillon is a little further north than Collioure.
Right, but it's still that section of the eastern part of the Pyrenees and going into the region of what we would call the Corbière, which we know from the wines, right?
Well, I also know it because I go there.
You go there. I think of it as this wine country, so they fought over it a lot. But in any case, they were still part of this world of Catalonia, which means that the language that they spoke was Catalan.
Oh, sure.
Not French.
Oh, no. Yeah, long ago, nobody spoke French.
It was because it wasn't French.
Yeah, there wasn't a French yet.
And the name comes from the French version of the Catalan word. And in France, in the 1400s, it was simply called Collioure.
Collioure.
Okay. So it's like the vowels
so
got reversed.
Couliere.
Okay. Collioure. Yeah. And it means a rounded bay.
Well, there you go. That's exactly what it is.
That's exactly what it is, right?
Descriptive.
So it was a very important residence for the kings of Mallorca. And between the 1300s and the 1600s, it was batted back and forth and fought over between the kings of Aragon, the kings of Mallorca, the counts of Roussillon, and the kings of France.
Okay, so... Yeah.
So, this is a territory that obviously...
So it went back and forth, I assume?
It went back and forth enormously. And interestingly enough, part of it is because of this bay that was there. That the fortifications that were there from the 700s were very good. They were reinforced several times over the centuries, and they were considered to be a very important military outpost for watching what was going on the coast.
Yeah.
So obviously that was its principal interest because it was just a small fishing port outside of the fortified castle, basically. And then what happened was in the early 1600s, under Louis XIII, the French king, a treaty was signed with the Spanish king, and all of Roussillon became French. In 1681, to be exact.
1681, okay.
So
Recent-ish.
Compared to... In fact, it was signed by Louis XIV.
Okay.
And when it was signed, Vauban, General Vauban, who was this wonderful man. I don't know if we've really talked about him when we've talked about some places.
We've mentioned him lots
we really
of time.
should talk about him sometime and do it. He was this incredible engineer. He was a nobleman who was a general, and he was an engineer, and he was responsible for most of the fortifications on coastline that still exist in France. And he would often, and this is exactly what he did here, he took the ancient fortress that was really ancient, and he rebuilt it. And he turned it into a huge military fortress.
Okay.
So today, when you go to Collioure, because it is really the way most people enter, you park in the part that's more modern, generally speaking, and you walk along this walkway. On one side, you have the water of the bay, and on the other side, you have these enormous stone walls that are still part of the fortress. That was
You mean cliffs?
No, the walls. It's actually the walls of the fortress that.
Okay.
If you, the way we walked in was, I think that's. There may be other ways of getting in, but if you.
Yeah, I know what you mean now. Sorry.
Okay, so on one side you have the water of the bay, and you're going. You can see in the distance. You can see other parts of fortifications with the church tower, and then in fact, in front of you, a little further up, you can actually see cafes and things like that. But on your left are the walls of this enormous military fort that Vauban built. And that is what is there to this day. And what he did was he made it a fort that was important for the French Navy. So even in the 17th century, it was a very important naval base. Mm-hmm. The town was not a tourist town of any kind. I mean, it really was a military fort. And what happened was that that lasted up until the time of the French Revolution. After the Revolution, interestingly enough, its military function changed, and it became a training place for the Navy, which I didn't know. And when you go up to go into Collioure, and if you go this way, I don't know if there are really other ways of entering the old city itself. You have to go around part of the wall, the fortress, and you cross over this teeny little bridge. But before you do, there's now this huge plaque, this big sign in French and in Catalan and in English that gives you a very brief summary of the history.
I see.
Because it is still used for the training of the Navy SEALs. The French Navy SEAls. Okay. The ones that are the guys that go under boats to blow them up, like they did in the 1990s with the Greenpeace boat. That's where they were trained to do this. Yeah. So it's actually, there's a part of it that's off limits. It's still military. But what was interesting to discover, which I didn't know, since this fortress is still very imposing, not only is it still run by the military, by the Navy, but in 1939, it was used as a prison for the Spanish refugees. Because the French were not very nice with the Spanish refugees at the beginning. In the end of 1939, the Spanish Civil War basically was ending. The General Franco won the war, and there were hundreds of thousands of Spanish who fled Spain. Yes. This is a period that's called a retirada. And they came over the Pyrenees in various different places, and many of them came through this area because there was a major route, or by boat, and they were put into the fortress as a prison. And
because later, about 500,000 of them settled in southern France.
Yes.
But so apparently it was very difficult at the beginning.
Well, it was very difficult. And in fact, it's a whole long story that there's no one specific place to go and see anything about this history of France. But they came across in various places over the Pyrenees. Many, of course, came to Toulouse. There were over 150 or 200,000 Spanish refugees.
Growing up, I knew a lot of them.
Right, in Toulouse. But a lot of them did come along the coastline. And apparently there was a lot of ambiguity in terms of the French government not wanting some of the diehard militants of the Revolutionary Army in France, because they were worried that they were going to stir up trouble. And it turns out, yes, and of course the irony is that they were among the first to join the resistance against the Germans during the World War II. But what happened was that, and I'm reading now because I wrote this down as one of my notes, over 100 of these militant Spanish were actually tortured to death in this fort in Collioure. So it really has a very, very complicated history.
That's terrible.
Yeah, they were. And then, of course, what happened was when there was a huge scandal about this that came out in the newspapers in 1939, and many people were transferred to a place called Côte Vermeille, which I have heard of, which was a huge camp. Wouldn't go so far as to call it a concentration camp, but it was a holding camp for thousands and thousands of Spanish refugees, and it was inland. Mm-hmm. And so they were evacuated out of it. But the Navy kept it. It was occupied, the fort itself was occupied by the Germans during World War II. They installed they are the ones who put in new cannons and built blockhouses along the coast, but they took over this fort that was actually built by Vauban. And the irony is that in spite of all that, which is kind of like the part of the black history of Collioure in the 20th century, starting at the end of the 19th century, Collioure, which was, other than the fort, just a charming little fishing village. So you have the big fort, which is really imposing. I mean, the walls are extremely high. It's enormous. And then next to it, just built right up against it, you have this lovely, colorful little village that was basically a fishing village. And that, starting in the 1870s, was where a group of artists discovered that they could do some lovely painting. Mm. And that is why, to this day, most tourists go to Collioure because it's associated with Matisse and with a whole group of artists that were called the Fauves.
The Fauves, yes.
The Fauves. And the idea of the Fauve
which means fauve in French means
wild.
Yeah, beast.
Beast. Yes.
Yeah, it's like you if you mention a fauve, c'est un fauve, you think of a lion, a male lion. Or,
exactly.
Yeah.
it's a wild animal.
Yeah.
The term was used by an art critic at a moment in art history in the 1880s, or it may have been actually in 1890, I'm not even sure. But
sorry.
The reason why is because this group of artists, and the first one actually to go there was Matisse, and then another artist named André Derain, who is a very, very well-known artist from that time period. They were friends, and they went... They traveled a lot in the south of France. They spent a lot of time on the Riviera. They did. These are artists who came after the Impressionists, and of course they painted outside. They were inspired by the light, and the light in Roussillon is very vivid.
Yeah,
it's very vivid. The sky is very, very blue. The water is very, very dark blue, and the light is magnificent. And the houses were very, very colorful.
Yeah, so fauve, another meaning for it in French is the color. It's a type. It's a hue of red.
Fauve?
Oui.
Because I know mauve is a purple.
Yes, that's different. La couleur fauve.
Ah.
It's a red, almost like what you'd see in a flame.
Huh.
The type of red you see. So it's almost an orange, like my hibiscus over there.
Yeah.
It's a tiny bit more redder than that,
really?
And it would be fauve.
Oh,
yes.
That's interesting.
Yes.
Well, it comes from that, because what happened was that this was a period of experimentation in painting, and the artists that were part of this movement decided that they were going to use the color pure out of the tube, no mixing of colors. If you work with paint, what you know is that if you mix two colors together, it doesn't matter what two colors. I mean, we know, most people I think know that blue and red together make purple. But when you use colors directly out of the tube, and we're already at a time when colors were starting to be made in tubes, not just fabricated by the artists themselves. You know, they were still doing that, but they had ready-made colors. They're very vivid and very saturated colors. And what this particular group of artists wanted to do was use only these pure, very saturated color, not realistically at all, but to convey the intensity of the color and light in these places that they went. And they settled in Collioure because of the intensity of the vibration of the light off of the sea, because it is really amazing. It's blinding at sometimes if it's a very sunny day. And the houses are very colorful. They're all colored different colors. It's very beautiful to see.
How long did they stay there?
Well, they didn't. They stayed there probably for about 10 years.
Okay, that's a long time.
Off and on.
Yeah.
Off and on. They had they all rented houses there, and they would go together. And it was very interesting because it was a time period which is not the case anymore with artists in general, but it was a time period when artists went as little groups together. Mm-hmm. You know, like friends who were into the same kind of art, and they would go and they would rent a place. Whether it was the same house or just houses next to each other, I have no idea actually. But they would work together.
Right.
So that they could see what each one was doing, and they would talk to each other about their work because they were inspired by the same things. So at a given time, and this is, of course, the group that is started out being simply called the post-impressionists, but became known as the Fauve.
Or Fauvisme.
The Fauvism, exactly.
Yeah.
You have
Fauviste.
Matisse,
Yeah.
Dorin,
Yeah.
who's an artist I like his work a lot.
Your headphones.
My headphones are falling off.
Put them back on.
An artist named Marquet, who's very interesting. Marquet.
Marquet. Okay. I don't think I'm familiar with it.
If you go to the Bamberg Foundation here in Toulouse, he has a couple of his pieces that are very nice.
Okay.
Strangely enough, an artist that is known specifically for work in Toulouse, Henri Martin, and an artist named Signac.
Oh, I've heard of him.
Signac.
He did the huge monumental piece inside of the where they have the weddings in Toulouse.
No, that's Henri Martin.
Ah, ça, c'était Henri
Martin.
Martin. Ah, okay.
I mean, that's Henri Martin.
Right.
Henri Martin got the honor of having the most space inside the city hall for doing paintings.
But it kind of looks like Signac as well.
Yeah, these are all the post-impressionist guys.
Okay.
And two people who are mostly associated with Cubism, strangely enough, Georges Braque and Juan Gris. Mm-hmm. And they were buddies, all of these guys. And so they would go and they would stay a month or two, not all year, but a month or two, obviously mostly in the spring and summertime, in Collioure.
So this is 1880s.
1880s, yep.
Right.
Started in the 1870s, but the biggest time for it is the 1880s, 1890s. The movement of Fauvism actually went into the maybe 1900. I mean, it's a lot of these movements kind of had this high period and then just petered out and became something else after about 10 years or so. But the name, which is really interesting to know, I don't remember the name of the art critic, but a group of them had put on a show. And just like the term impressionism came from an art critic and it was a negative term, I mean, looked at a painting by Monet and said, what the hell is this impression? This isn't a finished work. This is just somebody's doing a sketch. It's like an impression of something. And the guys, Monet and his friends, they went, okay, we're impressionists, you know. So what happened here was that the art critic took a look at the paintings, particularly the work of Matisse and Derain, because they were using explosive, saturated color in a largely non-realistic way. You know, Derain did paintings, not very big, but the trees are red, the sky is purple. I mean, you know, it just, you know, it's like wild animals. It's disgusting. It's wild colors. This is disgusting. Yeah. It's like fauve. And they went, it suits our idea of what paint should be. Their idea being that you don't mix colors, you don't use grays, you don't use blacks. You give it a punch. I mean, this is what they wanted, to give it a punch. Now, the reality is that you have artists like Matisse, who lived a very long, long life. Yeah. Whose work was always about color in some way or another. His work is very joyous, but he went through different stylistic periods. And then you have other artists like Derain, whose work is really, to this day, associated with Fauvism. And whatever else he did, it doesn't compare to the work that he did when he was in that particular time period.
Interesting.
That's, you know, the period that was...
Yeah, things moved along. I mean, things changed rapidly in the, you know, with the paint, with this art. Within 20 years, they would totally change how they represented things.
Yep.
It was really quite surprising.
Well, the reality is that starting in the middle of the 19th century and right into World War II, so we're 100 years, it's almost like every 10, 15 years, there was a new movement.
Yeah.
And some of them had lasting effects.
Yeah.
And really are important in terms of what the influences that they've had on other people since. And others came and went in short term and just kind of piddled out, that kind of thing. It's very interesting.
And only people who study art would know about those.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Or look at them. Even, ironically, because it has nothing to do specifically with paintings, but the movement called Art Nouveau, which is largely about decoration and architecture. It's a movement that didn't last more than 10 years. Mm. But every movement seemed to have caused another movement. It was like action, reaction, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So this is really what put the town of Collioure on the map as a place for people to go and visit. And what's interesting is that all of this is parallel to the time when these other things were happening. And it started much earlier. So in 1905, Derain spent a whole year in Collioure. Matisse was with him. And they asked for people like Picasso and Dali, who were not necessarily doing the same kind of work, but who were people that they knew. They were all people who knew each other. They invited them to come. And this is how Picasso and Dali started hanging out along the coastline of southern France.
Right, because they're both Catalan anyway.
They're both Catalan.
And they were pretty young then.
They were, in 1905, Picasso was 30 or 31.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure Dali. I mean, we were all young. I mean, basically. Matisse was already a little older. But they were in the same, same category. So if you go to Collioure now, the village itself, not the fortress. The fortress you see from the outside. I don't know if you can even have access to the inside because it is still a military base. But the village, of course, is very touristy. It's very beautiful. It's very, very, very colorful. It's not flat. It's very charming. It's got these tiny little narrow alleyways with the houses that are all very different colors. It's very fauve-like in the houses. And there is a fauve trail you can follow.
Oh,
that's actually on the sidewalk and little streets. And you can walk around and go up and down and in and out. And then when you get done with this little walk, besides visiting the church, which has a side of it that's old fortress that hangs out over the water, and the walls over the sea. It's a very lovely little town.
So is that the one called Notre Dame des Anges?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. What you can do then is you can go inside this teeny little museum called the Maison de Fauvisme.
Uh-huh.
And it's very nice. It's very small, but it's very, very lovely. And it gives you examples and the history of Fauvisme and how it evolved as a style of painting and the color involved in it. And it's charming. It's not a big museum at all. Mm-hmm. The Museum of Collioure, which is outside the old part, not so interesting.
Okay.
But this little Maison de Fauvisme, it gives you you have a couple of little examples of Derain and Matisse and other painters, and it really shows you the evolution of their painting style with all the colors,
Right. So the sad truth is little museums like that can't afford a Derain or a Matisse.
No.
So they probably have maybe some sketches or maybe some tiny pieces or reproductions.
Exactly. Tiny pieces or reproductions. Right. You're absolutely right. That is the problem. But Collioure, I hadn't been back in a long time. We spent a weekend doing a little bit of this coastline and everything. And I know that everybody goes there. Lots and lots of tourists go there. Lots of people I've met, lots of people I've done visits with. And they say, well, when I go to the coast, I'm going to go to Collioure. And I keep thinking, well, what do they really know about Collioure? It's interesting that it's become a spot that people hear about, that everybody wants to go to. Now, we were there on a weekend that the weather was iffy. Mm-hmm. This is the end of November. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of wind. I'm not a big fan of wind. So part of the other weekend events that we did, it was a little hard for me because of the wind. But even so, and it was chilly. It wasn't a warm weekend. But even so, it was packed with people.
Yeah.
It was absolutely packed with people.
It's scenic.
It's very scenic. The view of the bay and of the mountains is magnificent from there. The fortress is very imposing. The village is just gorgeous. And of course, it's filled with, cafes and restaurants.
Do they have little boat rides or anything like that you noticed?
I think that they do some outings in the summertime. They do a cross outing, I believe, that you could actually go across the bay from. But I think it's just one of those things where it depends on the weather.
So we had another episode about Collioure. It was episode 179, and that was more like a trip report,
Yeah.
It's called Collioure Travel Tips, and it was with Mathieu Gamache, who had stayed there with his kids. Mm-hmm. And so we talk more about what it's like, the beach, the this, the that, the food.
Right.
But we didn't go at all into all this history.
No.
So this is great that we're talking about the history.
Yeah,
because it's fascinating.
It's very, very touristy. I mean, it's even for me, who generally likes things that are touristy, I think that there would be days in the summertime when I would not want to go.
Right.
It's kind of like Carcassonne. It's a place I love. But there are times of the year when it's just too filled with people for me.
Right. So off season, it's okay. It's
off season, it's really nice.
Yeah.
And one of, course, it's kind of a joke because if you live in the southeast of France, everyone knows Collioure, not because of the painting, but because of the anchovies. Because it's the home of anchovies. It is still the place where there are two. I don't even know if you'd call them factories, because I stopped in one of them, bought us a bunch of stuff, where this is where anchovies come from in France.
So this is Catalan style anchovies,
yes,
which is not the super salty, awful stuff that
some of them can be.
Well, they can be, I'm sure, but Catalan style anchovies are like little tiny fillets with a little bit of oil and some seasoning, and usually a little bit of a vinegar of some sort.
It depends, because when I went into this, we went shopping. And by the way, for those people who are interested in doing a visit to Collioure, if you are interested in buying the anchovies, don't buy them in one of the little shops inside the village. Go to one of these two places that are within walking distance from outside where the parking area is, because if you buy it inside the village, it's twice as expensive for the same exact thing, and you have a much bigger choice. They have two sections. It was very interesting. One section is anchovies just in brine. And strictly, so you have to wash them off before you can eat them.
And prepare them. Yeah.
And the other is anchovies in oil, and then anchovies with herbs and anchovy paste and all these other things,
Right. So yeah, in my family, because we're all from around here, we have various recipes of anchovies. And sometimes it's hard in Toulouse to find the fresh stuff. I mean, it's not fresh, but like you said, it's just brined.
Right.
It's just barely cooked, and then you just have to season it the way you like them.
Right.
And it's a big thing. And this is the type of thing you bring out at aperitif.
Right.
It's perfect. You just eat it with a toothpick. It's a very small little fish fillet.
Very, very, very tiny. Yes. And you either love them or don't. I mean, I happen to love anchovies.
I love them. I don't love them when they're super salty.
Right.
But the more fresh Catalan style anchovies are delicious.
Exactly. And of course, Americans know Caesar salads. A real Caesar salad has anchovies in the sauce.
Yeah.
But here, something interestingly enough that doesn't come from Collioure, but actually is technically, I think, closer to Nice, is the pissaladière.
Yes.
Which is like a pizza dough with a layer of cooked onions and anchovy fillets on top.
Yes, it's delicious.
It's good.
Really good. It's really good, yeah. And anchovies are lovely because it's a very sustainable fish.
Yes.
They're tiny little fish.
Yes.
So they don't take years to grow. You can eat anchovies till kingdom come. They will have them.
They will have them.
Yeah.
So to continue, because this is along this coastline. Actually, we did it in the opposite direction, but we're going to go south from here.
Okay.
And as you go south, it's going to go to the two towns that are basically the last two towns before you get to the Spanish border. One is Port-Ventre.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Which is a real port. And which, in spite of what you just did, which is make that face, and which my husband did, I actually liked.
You liked it?
I liked it. I liked it. Not it's not pretty, but what I liked about it was that the it's a huge port. That's a real port, a real fishing port, and also a port for maritime activity. And it's in this tiny, tiny, tiny little bay. And I found it very charming and very untouristy. And after Collioure, it was refreshing.
Well, that's true.
It's really refreshing.
Yeah.
And also, strangely enough, in the area, it's Port Vendre that is known for having the best restaurants.
I bet it does, because this is where there's the population, the year-round population.
Year-round population.
Right.
And it's where the chalutiers, which are the fishing boats, really come in now.
Okay, I will give it another try.
Right. So it's not because it's gorgeous, because it's not, but it's charming in the sense that it's authentic, it's hilly. These towns are all, once you get off the bay, it starts going up into the hills. I walked up a little bit. I walked around. There's something about it. I thought to myself, oh, okay, this is what I could imagine all of these towns being like maybe 40, 50 years ago before they became very, very, very touristy. Mm-hmm. But none of these places are very far apart. It's like you end one and the other one begins.
Yeah.
And in between, you have little sections of gorgeous coastline with cliffs. And two of the things that we did, one of which I did in spite of myself because I didn't want to, was go to the site of the lighthouse of Point Béart.
Point Béart.
Point Béart.
B-E-A-R-T.
B-A-R. Béart.
Oh, okay.
And the reason we went there, and this is
This is something you walk to.
No.
Oh.
You take your car on this road that's you drive along the, there are signs indicating it. I mean, it's a place that tourists go to all the time. But you take this very narrow road along some cliff once you get out of Port Vendre, and it follows along the cliff, and you get to the end of this road. It's a magnificent, magnificent view of the ocean, of the Mediterranean, with enormous cliffs. And there's this lighthouse, but it's famous because this is where they measure the winds.
Ooh.
So we went there because my husband would like to be a seagull, you see. So he thinks that wind is the most wonderful thing in the world.
Oh,
and
boy.
I could barely get out of the car.
Yeah.
But he did. And I got back into the car, actually, and I watched all of these people, tourists, come and go walking. And it's a place you can walk and you can visit the lighthouse. It's an automated lighthouse, but there are a few houses of people who actually work for the maritime system that live there. And if you follow the path to the lighthouse, you go to the other side. But from where I was, which was on the bay side, you have a spectacular view of the last bay that you get to, and the town of Banyuls is on the other side.
Okay, you're saying that wrong.
I know. I never know how to say
Banyuls.
it. Banyuls. And in between where the lighthouse is and Banyuls is
Banyuls sur-mer.
Is a huge beach and several
sandy beach, right?
Sandy beach and some very, very well how do you say balisé in English? I don't even know anymore. Well taken care of coastal walks.
Right. So
there's a whole series of coastal paths.
Well-maintained paths.
So while he was trying to be a seagull, seeing if his arms would float him out above the rocks, I was appreciating the view and took a bunch of pictures actually on the other side.
From inside the car.
And from standing on the other side of the car away from the wind. And then we continued south. And what we did was we stopped at a place that I never heard of before. And this is a place called the Site de l'Anse de Paulille. I think it's Paulille, but
So spell it.
Paulille.
Okay, Paulille.
Paulille or Paulille?
Yeah,
I think it's Paulille.
Well, Yeah, it could be either one. I'm not sure. And we'd have to ask a local.
I have to ask. I really have to ask. I actually went on Wikipedia again to confirm it, but I didn't look for the pronunciation. And I had never heard of this place, but my husband had. And sure enough, there are all these signs because it has been a nature preserve since the year 2008. Mm-hmm. And it's on the site of what was the Nobel Dynamite Factory.
Good grief.
And so this is what's fascinating about it, is that there are vestiges, actually, of the factory that have been turned into a museum.
Huh.
There are two trails that you can walk the cliffs it's absolutely gorgeous. It's not very long to do. There's a huge parking area. But the site itself, which is behind this magnificent beach, has been turned into a park. So it's very green and it's very well taken care of. And in the height of the season, there are places where you can get a snack. The thing was closed because most of the things there are not open on the weekends. But the beach is gorgeous. The paths to do a hike on are absolutely magnificent. And they take you up a little bit on the cliffs and you get a view over the bay and over the sea, which is absolutely magnificent. And it turns out that it's because the factory, which was there until 1984, from 1870 till 1984. It was the Nobel factory in France, which I didn't know. That's where they produced all of the dynamite. It's been turned into a national park.
Do you know why they put it there? Like, did they have...
Because of at the time it was built, there was nothing around. So they didn't have to worry about the explosives endangering anything in terms of city or habitation, and because of the water.
I see.
Because they were using
water for the process.
Right. Okay. I think they were using water for the process, and they were also, I think, using the water for cooling.
Yeah, I have no idea how you make dynamite.
I have no idea how you make it either. But
so did you go into the museum?
No, it was closed.
Okay.
It was closed. There are certain things that are only open in the height of the season, and then there are other things that were simply, we were there on a Sunday. I don't know if there was a particular reason why that day it was closed. But what was interesting was that it's really, the site is gorgeous.
Huh.
It's absolutely beautiful.
So do you get to see the factory from the outside?
You can get to see the walls of the factory from the outside.
Okay.
And what's strange is that that's on one side of this very huge curved beach, which is this magnificent bay, really, or Anse, I guess, which is a small bay. And on the other side, this is why it's very strange, are cement bunkers from the Germans.
Yeah, I saw photos of that.
Yeah.
The bunkers, they look like Cylons.
Yeah, it's very strange,
Yeah.
And at first when he said, well, we're going to go to this place, and it used to be where the Nobel Dynamite Factory is, and I went, really? Really? We're going to do this?
I had never heard of this.
Well, I guess maybe it's because it's only been open as a park since 2008.
I guess.
But it was lovely. And
But this is the kind of place I drive past it to go to my apartment in Spain, and I'd never stop.
You never stop there.
I need to stop.
Right.
Stop.
Right. It was really lovely. And not only that, but the hiking, these trails, I mean, you have to climb a little bit. I mean, it was very beautiful. It really was. It was one of those nice days where it was, and once you get there, there are benches. I mean, there's a real beach, and then if you go, there's a wall that protects. Has nothing to do with the factory, but now that they've made it into a park, so there's a wall. It's not too high; it's about 4 feet high, and that protects the beach because there are winds, so that keeps the sand from being washed away, basically inland. And on the other side, they've put up picnic tables and benches, and it's very green, and there's a huge parking area. And it was really wonderful.
Bathrooms, maybe?
Bathrooms.
Yeah, good.
And it was very much, it was fun because coming from here, it was real Mediterranean vegetation and cactus and tamari trees and pines, coastal pines. It was nice.
Yeah,
I liked it.
Despite the wind, you liked it.
Yeah.
It is windy over there.
Yeah, it's windy there. And this was not as bad as the lighthouse. I mean, the lighthouse was like, really? I am not a seagull. I mean, I will never be one either, And then last but not least, or last, whatever, is Banyuls.
No. Banyuls sur mer.
Banyuls sur mer. They didn't say that. They just said Banyuls.
Oui, Banyuls, oui, mais ça s'appelle Banyuls sur mer.
Which is touristy.
Yeah.
Very charming.
Not as much as Collioure, though.
Not as much as Collioure.
Yeah.
And very different. It's the center of winemaking.
Uh-huh.
It's bigger. It's much bigger than Collioure. It's actually a small, you could say it's a town. It's not quite a city, but it's definitely not a village.
Uh-huh.
It is the center of winemaking. And it's got also a lot of spas. And we went to this hotel that was to die for.
Huh? What was it called?
Oh, she's asking me a question. I have the paper at home, and look at me. I forgot.
You didn't write it down?
I didn't write it down.
Okay, you'll call me later.
I'm going to call you, tell you.
Yeah, I'll put it on the show notes.
Even my husband, who hates hotels, loved it. And it was like the room itself was just okay. It was a normal, regular room with a teeny mini balcony with a view out that you got to see a little bit of the water and a little bit of the hills. But it was up on the hill. It was gorgeous inside this hotel. It's a hotel that's been around for, I think she said it was 80 years old or something like that. It was absolutely fabulous inside. And all of these hotels there have spas, and they use the seawater, and you can go there just and use it as a hotel, or you can go there and have all of these treatments. You can have a massage. You can do all of these other things.
Yeah.
And it's known for that kind of thing. And it's known, of course, being for the center of wine production. And the wines of this area are basically mostly aperitif wines.
Okay, so a little sweet.
They're a little bit sweet. But they also have two very, very good dry wines there. We bought a bottle of one of white and one of red. They're not cheap. These are very, very, very good wines. And it turns out, aside from the fact that we liked staying there, we had dinner in a wonderful restaurant. And I will tell you the name because we could not believe how great it was and how inexpensive it was. And it's called La Table de Jordi.
De Jordi.
Yeah, Jordi.
C'est dur d'être bébé.
Pourquoi?
That's an old song.
It's an old song.
By Jordi.
Okay. Honestly, Annie, for people who like fish and seafood and other things, it was original, it was delicious, it was copious, and it was not expensive. Mm-hmm. And it was someone at the reception in the hotel, when I asked where should we eat, she said, well, there's only one place in all of Banyuls that she thinks is really good, and the others are not there. And we went there, and we luckily reserved a table because it was packed.
Probably small, yeah.
It was medium size, but it was unbelievably good.
La Table de Jordi.
Yep, the Table de Jordi. I'm giving them a nice big plug, yeah. And it had the most wonderful kind of seafood stew. I mean, it was just absolutely fabulous. It was just amazing. And it turns out, so Banyuls.
Banyuls. Don't think about how it's spelled. Just repeat. Banyuls.
Banyuls.
Yes, there you go.
Banyuls.
It's the spelling that's throwing you off.
It's making me off, yes. Yeah. It has been producing wine since 400 BC.
Oi!
By the Greeks.
The Greeks.
And then the Romans. And its cépage, that is, this variety of grapes, are unique to this cove and this area. And it has been famous all this time, and still to this day, because of how steep the vineyards are.
I bet.
They are incredible to see. They are terraced and steep with stone walls holding them up, which is probably one of the reasons why the wine is not cheap.
Right.
Because everything is picked by hand.
Everything by hand, yeah.
Everything is done by hand there. Carrying the baskets with the grapes on your back. I mean, it was unbelievable to see as you drive through and around, because we did some backcountry driving just to see, because the town itself is down below. There's a bay. The restaurant is right on down below, right on the water. That's where everything is. That's where the shops are and everything. But then the hotels are further up in the hills. It's also developing. And then the vineyards are above that. And you can take these back roads There's a back road that takes you up where you get a view over the entire town, over the sea and everything else. Everything is very well marked, by the way. There are signs everywhere giving you directions how to get places, how to take hikes,
so
everything.
How many days would you say you need to see all of these things you mentioned?
We did it in 2 days.
2 days is all. Just one overnight.
We did.
So you drove early in the morning from Toulouse?
Exactly. We could have done 2 nights easily. It really would have. I would have preferred, considering what we did, and also because it didn't give us that much time in each place as much as I would have liked, especially the coastal outdoor kinds of stuff to do. My suggestion is a 2-nighter, basically, really. And
you could stay in any of these towns.
Any of these towns.
Right, because it's so close.
Exactly.
But you have to have a car.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, you can take the train and get off at 1, any of them, because it's the same train.
I see.
In fact, at Port-Vendre or at Banyuls, you can get out and you can actually, but they're very steep, and it's not that easy to get around other than down below by the water in any of these places.
Right.
You know. But there is a train, because it's a train that goes to Port-Bou.
Okay, and it stops in all 3?
It stops in all 3. It's a local train.
I see. Huh.
That you can actually pick up at Narbonne, if you know what I mean. You can do it from almost any direction, north or west or whatever.
So if the train is running, it's a good option.
Yes, it's a good option. But if you really want to be able to take advantage of the beach, to go see this Anse where this gorgeous beach is and all of that, you really need a car.
Yeah. Yeah.
You really need a car. It would be very hard to do unless you're a bike and you're a bicycle.
You sell it really well. You know, next week I need to go away with my daughter for a few days. Maybe.
I sell it, huh? Yeah,
You sold it well.
I should go to work for the Chamber of Commerce.
You really should. You've done good there.
I've done good.
You've done good. Like,
I'll go back. Let's go together. I want to go back. I loved it. I mean, it was very strange because I realized that my original idea was, I want to see the Mediterranean and then stop at Collioure. I haven't been there in ages, but I knew we didn't want to stay in Collioure. And I loved where we stayed. I really did. I loved...
That was in Banyuls, right?
In Banyuls, yeah. And it really, of course, it was off season. So
sure.
To be warned, I mean, I got an incredible price on the hotel room, and it was just because it was off season. But it was great. And I loved what we ate. And I loved visiting the coast and seeing all these different things. And the 3 towns, to be honest, are all very different. So between the 3, you have one that's a very authentic kind of more almost working class maritime town. That's Port-Vendre. But it's interesting. I think it's a really interesting place to spend an hour or 2. I mean, really, that kind of thing. And that's from there.
And apparently it has good restaurants.
And it's from there that the road takes you to the lighthouse, if you're venturous, if you really want to do that. And then it blends into Collioure, which is north of it, and then it blends into the Anse, and then further south you get to... I mean, all of them is within 15, 20 kilometers.
Wow.
You know? So it's a great section to visit.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Elise. That was really, really interesting.
Well, thank you, Annie.
I'm glad we did it. So if you want to listen to the other episode about Collioure, it's 170... What did I say? 176? 175?
170-something.
174.
174. There you are. Yeah. Yeah. And it's long live Roussillon and Catalonia and the Mediterranean.
Yeah, lovely part of the world. Yeah, just lovely part
of the world. It really is.
Yeah, I love it.
Here's to our wine and anchovies.
All right. Ooh, you make me hungry.
Bye, Annie.
Au revoir. Thank you, Oscar Roche and Amber Brown, for pledging to support the show on Patreon this week. Patrons enjoy several rewards that you'll find listed at patreon.com/join us, patreon.com. Join us, no spaces or dashes. I just shared a pre-show conversation I had with Elise about the strikes going on in France right now, and I'll release a new lunch break French, hopefully before Christmas, but for sure before the end of the year. Now, this is not something I've talked a lot about, but I did one this week, so I want to bring it up. I offer a service where you can email me your itinerary. Then we talk about it over the phone, and I send you my custom recommendations over email. And you can get all of that for a $50 donation. Email Annie@joinusinfrance.com to set it up. And if you'd like to support the show without spending a penny you wouldn't have otherwise, before you go shopping on Amazon, go to the bottom of any page on joinusinfrance.com and click on the Amazon ad. Because you came to Amazon through my site, I get a small commission. It pays podcasting bills, and it doesn't cost you a penny more. Same thing with the booking.com ad for your hotels. And thank you very much. Okay, for my personal update this week, this is a bit of a strange one. We have a mulberry tree in our yard. It's a lovely big tree that makes a lot of shade, big leaves. It's gorgeous. But mulberry trees grow very fast. Each year you have to cut it down pretty much to the trunk, and it grows thousands of pounds of new branches within 1 year. Last year we hired a guy, and he was super fast and effective, and we could do that again. But this year I've decided, I might regret it, that I'd like to keep those branches and mulch them and use the mulch in my flower beds because, in the spring and summer, I'm always fighting weeds, so I might as well mulch, right? French people do that, and I'm French, so why not? But maybe it was a crazy idea. I ordered a branch mulching machine on Amazon. I had never used one before. It was a German brand. It was, middle of the road price. And it worked great for 3 minutes. And then the fuse blew. So I tried to reset it. I read the instructions several times and nothing worked. And it's one of those machines that, it's all encased in plastic. You can't open it to change the fuse. So I needed to ship it back to the manufacturer in Germany. Now, sometimes Germans, because I live in Europe, I buy a lot of stuff from Germany, right? And sometimes they send you really good instructions, but this time they didn't. They sent me a list of drop-off points. They had about 50 around the Toulouse area. I tried a local grocery store and a printer store. That's how it works in France. You can pick up and drop off packages at various stores, florists, eyewear stores, all sorts of places. But when you show up with a mulching machine, they can say no. It's too big, it's too heavy, and that one was both. So I emailed the company and I didn't hear back right away. In the meantime, I got another Amazon delivery because it's Christmas, So I asked the guy if by any chance he could take this package for DPD. That's who delivered the package in the first place. And I had a voucher to send it back through DPD. He said no, they are our biggest competitor. But he was super nice and he told me about the DPD depot where the size and the weight of the package wouldn't matter. So I went there, and the new guy I talked to, he said, your shipping voucher says DPD in blue ink. That means you're supposed to go to Chronopost, which is the post office kind of fast shipping service. How was I supposed to know that? I asked him, and he just shrugged his shoulders and said, look, lady, if you drop it off here, it'll stay here forever because it's blue and we only take red. Okay, thankfully, Chronopost was only a few blocks away. And to my great surprise, they knew that when DPD is written in blue, they're supposed to take it. I was sure they would say, lady, are you stupid? It says DPD on the voucher, and here it's Chronopost. What are you doing here? But no, they didn't bat an eye. They got the memo. So finally, my broken machine is on its way back to Germany. So I've decided to buy a new mulching machine locally, where I can just drive it back if it breaks. But I'm really afraid it'll break too. I don't know. Do you mulch your own branches? Are these machines worth the trouble? I'd love to hear back because, maybe it's just a French thing. I hear people running these machines in their backyards. They have a very specific sound, It's a thing here. And I listen to gardening shows on French radio. And they say, mulch your own branches. And, they're right, because a bag of store-bought mulch is like 10 euros. So it's the smart way to go. We have thousands of pounds of branches every year. So, but I have to find a machine that will work for lots and lots of mulberry branches. So I'll keep you updated. We'll see how far I go with that one. If you want to recommend the podcast to someone who already listens to podcasts, tell them they'll find Join Us in France wherever they get their podcasts. And if they listen to music but not podcasts on their phones, tell them to search for Join Us in France on Spotify or Pandora. And if they don't normally listen to anything on their phones, send them to joinusinfrance.com. And thank you for listening and spreading the word. Send questions or feedback to Annie@joinusinfrance.com. Have a great week of trip planning or a great week in France. I'll talk to you possibly next Sunday, but if I can't get the Christmas interview, I'll skip 1 week and I'll be back on December 29th. Merry Christmas to you all and au revoir. Well, I should say Joyeux Noël to you all, right? Au revoir. The Join Us in France Travel Podcast is written and produced by Annie Sargent and copyright 2019 by Addicted to France. It is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license.